everybody. I thought today I'd tell you a little bit about what I think Lady Catherine would probably call her nether garments. And here I am, wearing a shift, or a smock it's sometimes called. And this is probably the most important garment in her entire wardrobe, because this is what Lady Catherine would wear next to her skin every day. It's the only garment she owns that she can wash. Well, you wouldn't really want to take those very costly fabrics she used for her outer garments, dunk them in water down at the river and beat them with sticks. They're far too valuable for that. So they are brushed and sponged, hung with some sweet smelling herbs. But this, her shift, can be washed. And it's all because of this rather wonderful fabric called linen. And I learned about linen rather the hard way, I suppose, because when I started making costumes, clothes for Lady Catherine to wear, I hadn't got a very big budget, and I thought perhaps I could make a few shortcuts, use some cheaper fabric to make her shift. So I made one with cotton sheeting. Well, it looked all right actually. It was a shift, did the job. From a distance it worked. But then I found a supplier who could provide good quality linen that I could afford. So I made a shift from linen just as she would. And boy oh boy, what a difference that made. It was so comfortable. It was cool. And bear in mind that when I'm at Compton Castle helping the National Trust, I appear as Lady Catherine sometimes for up to 6 hours in the summer. So comfort's important to me. But what was it that made that difference? What was it about linen that made it so comfortable? It's a fantastic fabric. It's very absorbent. It can, they say, absorb up to 25% of its weight in water before it starts to feel damp. And it also dries very quickly. So lots of positive points for linen in Lady Catherine's time. But it's been around for a very long time. It's probably the very oldest textile that we know anything about. Unbelievably, an archaeological dig in Georgia in Eastern Europe discovered a fragment, a tiny fragment of linen woven textile, which they think is about 35,000 years old. And it was used throughout history. For example, the ancient Egyptians liked linen a lot. It was a high status fabric for them because it was expensive. And they used it to wrap the mummies in. It was so expensive in ancient Egypt at one time that they actually used linen cloth as a currency. Now, it continued to be expensive all through history, and there's a couple of reasons for that. It comes from the flax plant, which produces these wonderfully long fibres, very, very strong fibres. But flax as a crop is actually quite demanding to grow in terms of time and effort. And it can be a little bit tricky to perfect the art of weaving with those long fibres. So it's not a cheap fabric, but it does grow really well in our damp climate in Northern Europe. So in Lady Catherine's time, over in the Low Countries, the Netherlands, and also in Ireland it started to be grown, and some parts of southern England it was grown. And she did wear her shift every day. Lots of advantages for her, aren't there? We hear lots of stories though, don't we? Lots of myths about how terribly smelly everyone must have been in Tudor England. I'm not convinced, you know, because there's lots of evidence that they were already very well aware of the link between cleanliness and hygiene and disease. It's just that they dealt with it in a rather different way to us. They weren't terribly keen on dunking themselves in hot water. They did believe that infection could still enter your body through the pores in the skin. So they didn't bathe very regularly, but they did wash face and hands every day with water. And they used linen cloths because of its absorbent qualities. They believed it could absorb quantities of sweat and grease, so they would rub themselves every day with linen cloths. Lady Catherine, of course, probably had quite a number of shifts in her wardrobe, and she had laundry maids to keep them fresh and clean for her. She'd have a clean one on every day when she went to bed. And they used a substance called lye to remove any stains from the shifts. Lye is made by passing water through wood ash, and it's quite caustic. It's an alkaline solution, so you wouldn't want to wear it on your use it on your top clothes, but it's a good way of cleaning the shifts. So sometimes they would soak the shifts and the linen in lye, and then rinse it out, probably down in the river, and hang it out on the bushes to dry in the sun, where it would dry quite quickly. So there it is. This is a shift. Shall I do a twirl so you can see it all the way round? Here we go. It's not a very flattering item of clothing on its own, really, is it? A bit like a big baggy nightie. But it's practical. And there's a couple of practical features I want to point out to you, particularly under the arms. Can you see what happens there? There is an extra square of fabric. It's called a gusset, and it's a jolly good idea, because if that does get a little bit soiled, what you can do is you can snip out that square of fabric and simply sew in another one without the cost of a whole new shift. Now, gentlemen, you would be wearing something very similar but cut off a bit shorter, and often the gentleman would cut a slit at the side in their shift, or their shirt sometimes it's called, shirt, and they would fold it through from the back and from the front to form an impromptu pair of underpants. Another little feature I should tell you about is the embellishment on the cuffs. That's actually faux black work. I've done it on my machine. It's a very poor approximation of a wonderful embroidery technique called black work, which I do hope someday I'll have time to perfect doing by hand, because it was very popular in Catherine's time. It came from Spain with Katherine of Aragon, and they would use it to embellish the cuffs and the collars. But if you put too much embroidery onto your shift, then it becomes a little bit more tricky to wash it and launder it. So very often then the collars and cuffs become separate, and they use pins or ties to fix them to the garment. So linen becomes the undergarment. Still put your thicker, warmer layers on top. And there's even some words we use today that come from linen, which associate it with being an undergarment. Lining, which is the fabric that goes under the top fabric, comes from the word linen. And lingerie, or lingerie if we should say it like that, underwear, also from the same word. So that's a little bit about linen and laundry and shifts, and I'll see you again another time.